All right. All right, you may be seated. All right, Kelly, we're back on the record. Ms. Watson, may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Browning, we were talking before the break about some email correspondence that you reviewed, and I was asking you questions about the number of children that the defendant talked about in this email correspondence. Your Honor, may I approach?
You may.
Defense exhibit number 23.
Number 23.
Number 23. And the jurors have already heard this, and they've already had it read to them, but Dr. Browning, I'm going to direct your attention to a portion, the second full paragraph, starting with the first line. Would you read those first two lines for the jurors, and then I'm going to ask you a couple questions about them.
I have twins, a girl and a boy, and a younger daughter. Lee and Tom are 20-year-old juniors at Georgia Tech. Addie is 17 and is a senior in high school, also on her way to Georgia Tech. All three have extensive volunteer hours and have significant work experience.
You can stop there. What's the date of that email?
This email was written on August 8th, 2010.
And who was it written from?
It was from Hemy Neuman.
And who was it written to?
It was written to Neumann8@yahoo.com.
And was it also written to somebody else and forwarded from that?
It's to Andrea Sneiderman.
Okay. And when did the defendant tell you that the angel came to him and told that these kids were his, and he had 5 kids, that Sneiderman kids were his? When did the defendant tell you that happened?
That was in July 2010.
And that email was written after that date?
This email was written in August.
Okay. So what, if anything, does that mean to you about the sincerity of the defendant's delusion, or as he described it to you, that he believed the Sneiderman kids were his?
Well, remember, people who have delusions believe their own delusions. It's everyone else who doesn't believe them. And so if Mr. Neumann really believed that he had 5 children instead of 3,
what would you expect to see there?
I would expect that he would report that in emails, and he would report that to other people. When conversations about his children come up, he would say, and I have 5 instead of 3.
What if people just didn't ask the right question, or they didn't ask it in the right way? What if, could that happen?
Sure, but it seems like in this email that he's spontaneously bringing up 3 children, and if one is spontaneously bringing up their children, then they believe that they have 5, they would spontaneously bring up that they have 5 children.
In your opinion, is the description of his family, of his children in that email, supposedly after he developed the delusion, is that consistent with somebody who really had a delusion or not?
It's not.
Okay. Your Honor, for demonstrative purposes, may I approach the witness?
You may.
I'm approaching the witness with State's Exhibit number 130. A copy of this has already been, yes, Your Honor, has already been provided to the defense, and it's for demonstrative purposes only. Dr. Browning, have you seen State's Exhibit number 130 before?
I saw it this morning.
Okay. And do you believe that this State's Exhibit number 130 would help you explain to the jurors your opinion and the sequence of events that influenced your opinion?
Sure.
Your Honor, at this time, the State moves State's Exhibit number 130 into evidence just for demonstrative purposes.
Any objection?
No objection.
It's submitted for 130. It's submitted to the record for demonstrative purposes. You may display it to the jury at this time if you wish.
Thank you. Mr. Moore, would you just say that, please? All right. Hey, Dr. Browning?
It is, yes.
I want to assume for the purposes of my question that the testimony has been thus far the date that the angel came to the defendant, who told you this story, that the angel came to him, telling him the kids were his, et cetera, et cetera. Did the defendant tell you a date when that happened?
He did not tell me a date.
Okay. I think you referred to July 2010?
Yes.
That the angel came to him and told him the kids were his?
Yes.
Did the defendant also describe for you a time when the angel came back?
Yes, he said that the angel came back in August 2010, and this is another issue with Mr. Neumann and a discrepancy. He told Dr. Crawford that when the angel returned in August 2010, that the angel gave him the order to, quote, kill Mr. Sneiderman.
Is that the word he used when
Kill.
talking to Dr. Crawford back in 2011?
Yes, he used the word kill.
Okay. Did he use that same terminology with you?
He did not. When Dr. Huey and I saw him in June 2016, he said that the angel only ordered him to protect the children.
Why is that significant? Why is that distinction of note?
Because, again, it's the story changing in very important ways.
Okay. All right, but the defendant did tell you that in August 2010, the angel came back to him, and what did he tell you the angel said?
He told us that the angel said to protect the children.
Protect the children, and that was back in August 2010?
Yes.
Okay. Assume for the purposes of my question that the evidence in the case has been thus far that sometime around October 22nd, 2010, after the defendant and Andrea Sneiderman went to Greenville, South Carolina for the second time. Were you aware of that trip from your review of the material?
Yes.
Did the defendant tell you about that trip, that second trip to Greenville in October 2010?
We talked generally about his trips. I don't know that we talked specifically about the events of that other than to discuss their sexual activity on these trips.
Okay, well now's the time to talk about that. In his description to you of his relationship with Andrea Sneiderman in the months leading up to the murder, what did the defendant tell you about their relationship?
Mr. Neuman told Dr. Huey and me that he had sex with Andrea Sneiderman approximately half a dozen times, always out of town.
Did he know dates, times, locations, things like that?
No, he said that it was on their business trips.
On their business trips and not more specific than that,
No.
that you can recall? Okay. Anything about his description of the relationship he had with Andrea Sneiderman as he told it to you that was different from the material that you reviewed when he told other doctors about that relationship?
Yes, when he was discussing that relationship with Dr. Crawford in November 2011, he told Dr. Crawford that he couldn't remember having sex with Andrea Sneiderman. He said that there were fantasies and that his memory bleeds into fantasies and that he's not sure. He told Dr. Huey and me in June 2016 that there still was some confusion about fantasies with some sexual acts, but he knew unequivocally that he had had sex with Andrea Sneiderman approximately half a dozen times.
Okay. And did the defendant also tell you that Andrea Sneiderman had told him that she wasn't going to leave her husband?
Yes.
Did he tell you the approximate time that happened?
No, it was my understanding that she consistently said that she consistently struggled with a push-pull, very much, I like you, but I still have this commitment. So that was consistent throughout their relationship.
And that was based on the review of the evidence, the emails and other information that was provided to you?
Yes.
Okay, right. Assume for the purpose of my question that the angel came to the defendant, or his description, and said, protect the children in August 19th, 2010. Assume also that on or about October 22nd, 2010, after the Greenville trip, second time, Andrea Sneiderman told him, that's it, I'm done, I'm not doing this anymore, I'm not participating in this affair anymore. Assume that for me. What, if anything, is significant about the steps the defendant took to plan the murder, as he described them to you? Searching for a gun, contacting somebody about a gun, going to the range, taking a safety course. What's significant about the timing of those things?
Well, on your timeline here, it indicates that his Google search for a gun occurred after he learned that it was over between him and Mrs. Sneiderman. And
health issues?
Yes.
Is that a reason unrelated to any supposed psychosis?
Yes, and if the reason were related to the mental health issue or the psychosis, I think one might expect to see the gun search a little bit closer to the order to protect the children rather than so close in time to him being told that it's over.
Okay, thank you. So, but the defendant was consistent, right, among all of these mental health professionals that you talked about, Flores, Dr. Marks, Dr. Crawford, Dr. Huey. He did say angels, and he did say demons, and he did say he was hearing voices, right, and that it wasn't his fault. Well, that he had a mission. He had to kill Rusty. He had to protect the children. He told you that, right?
Yes.
Does the timing of the defendant's disclosure of these symptoms of auditory and visual hallucinations, the angel told him to do it, does the timing of when he first started talking about that have any significance to you?
Yes, he didn't mention any of these symptoms about angels or demons in lots of encounters with mental health professionals, and I believe it wasn't until he was interacting with his defense team that he mentioned that for the first time.
And then you're aware, of course, of when Dr. Flores interviewed the defendant for the first time in September 2011?
Yes.
Prior to Dr. Flores interviewing the defendant in September 2011, did you review any records that suggested that the defendant had been diagnosed with any mental illness at all?
No. Jail records throughout his incarceration up to that point in September 2011 did not indicate any mental illness at all.
Well, what about before his arrest? Are there any records before his arrest that the defendant disclosed this story about angels, demons, hallucinations? Anybody observed anything consistent with delusions? Anything like that at all in his history before his disclosure to Dr. Flores in September 2011?
There were not any records that I saw.
Dr. Browning, what's the difference between a delusion and a lie?
A delusion is a fixed false belief. So a delusion is someone actually believing something that is objectively not true, whereas a lie is telling something that is false. So people who are, and this is a point that comes up frequently in the hospital, if you ever tell someone in the hospital that they're delusional, a lot of the time they'll be upset and they'll say, I'm not lying, I'm not lying to you, this really happened. And it's a subtle point. When I explain to someone that I believe what they're telling me may be a delusion, I always say, I believe that you're experiencing this, I believe that this is what you honestly experience, and you're not lying, but it's still a false belief.
Did you review the defendant's interview with the Dunwoody Police Department in January 2011?
Yes.
Okay. And did you review all of it?
Yes.
Okay. And do you recall a portion of that interview where the defendant is asked about his relationship with Andrea Sneiderman?
Yes.
Do you remember what his response was?
Yes, he said that she was nice, that he would like to have I'm paraphrasing, he would like to have a relationship with her, but she wasn't interested, and so he couldn't.
Did he deny having a physical relationship with her?
Yes.
Did he deny having an affair?
Yes.
Did he deny having any motivation as it related to Andrea Sneiderman to harm or murder Rusty Sneiderman?
Yes.
Okay. And did the defendant talk to you when you met with him in June 2016 about that interview?
Yes.
And did he explain to you why it was that he answered the questions in that way?
Yes. We wanted to understand why, if he had a delusion and that he believed, why he didn't talk about that delusion to the police.
Why was that your question? Why wouldn't anybody lie to the police if they're caught and potentially going to suffer some negative consequences for committing a crime?
Well, someone who doesn't understand right from wrong wouldn't appreciate that they're going to suffer negative consequences. Someone who doesn't understand right from wrong believes that they have done the right thing, and so wouldn't necessarily hide anything from the police. So we wanted to know why he did hide things from the police.
And what did he tell you?
He said that at the time the police interviewed him, all they had on him was that he had rented a car.
And that's why he didn't tell them?
Yes.
He didn't think they knew already?
Right.
Is that consistent or inconsistent with somebody who has a delusion that he was doing the right thing in protecting his children by murdering Rusty Sneiderman?
That's inconsistent with not understanding right from wrong.
Okay. Were there other things that the defendant said during that interview? First of all, how long was that interview? Do you recall?
Oh, I think it was 6 hours.
Okay, it was very long. During that time period, were you observing, you said you watched the video yourself, were you observing the defendant's demeanor, how he acted, his behavior, things like that?
Yes, I wanted to see if he was in any way demonstrating any mental health symptoms at that point.
What, if anything, did you conclude from watching that very long interview with the defendant?
He did not appear to be manic at that time.
What would you have expected to see on that videotape? Because they weren't really doing anything, right? They're just sitting there talking. What would you have expected to see from somebody who was experiencing mania? Again,
this goes back to the mental status exam, where you can many times tell if someone is mentally ill just by looking at the way they behave. If Mr. Neuman were manic, Mr. Neuman would be talking very fast. He would be blurting things out. If he had this delusion that he was protecting the children, he would have mentioned that because he wouldn't have understood that that was wrong. He would have been provocative. He would have been hyperverbal with pressured speech, and what that means is he would have talked and talked and talked, and he wouldn't have been able to be interrupted. He would have been easily distracted. He would have been manic. Again,
breaking with reality?
Absolutely.
Did you see any signs that the defendant was very, very depressed and psychotic on that end of the spectrum?
No. What I saw signs of was that he was anxious. The police commented several times about how he was shaking like a leaf and appeared to be anxious, especially after they read him his Miranda rights.
And is that something you would consider to be a symptom or a sign of mental illness? Somebody being nervous when questioned by the police about a serious crime they in fact committed? Or would you consider that to be an appropriate, normal response in that situation from someone who doesn't have any mental illness?
I would think that that is entirely appropriate.
Let's talk about this rescue fantasy. The defendant told you that. What did the defendant tell you about why he killed Mr. Sneiderman?
He said that the angel told him to protect the children. He also said he didn't specifically know what he needed to protect them from. He said that only since he's been undergoing therapy has he appreciated what he might have been acting on, which is the history of sexual abuse that his sister has endured.
Okay, so that's what he told you in 2016.
Yes.
What did he tell you what he was thinking at the time? In 2010, when he decided to kill Rusty Sneiderman, did he tell you why he thought at the time that he was going to do it?
He said that, again, he had this notion that he needed to protect them, but he wasn't exactly sure what he wanted to protect them from.
How did he get the idea that he had to kill him? Couldn't he have done something less than that? Did you talk to him about any steps less than killing Rusty Sneiderman he could have taken if he genuinely believed that there was something going on with the kids or there was some danger to the kids?
Yes, he said that as soon as he got the order to protect the children, he said that his mind immediately went to kill Mr. Sneiderman. He said that his own history of abuse is what informed that leap, and he decided right then and there that he would do that and that he would not question it.
Okay, let me stop you for a second. His own history of abuse, and are you referring now to what the defendants told you?
Yes.
Did you review or were you provided any medical records from when he was a child?
No.
Any hospitalization reports, anything like that?
No.
Okay, do you know of any Child Protective Services reports or any intervention with this family or anything like that? Was any information like that provided to you?
No.
So when you say that, you're going by what the defendant reported?
Yes.
Okay, all right. And the defendant told you he didn't take any steps less than killing Rusty Sneiderman to protect the kids?
Yes, he said that he didn't do that. He said that his mind immediately went to kill Mr. Sneiderman, and that's what he set out to do.
Is that consistent with your experience with people who are really genuinely experiencing rescue delusions or feel like somebody, be it a delusion, it's not true, but somebody is actually in danger?
No, a person with a delusion, again, typically understands the difference between right and wrong. And so if a person has a delusion, they're going to act in a way that it is consistent with that delusion. And so if his delusion was that his children were in danger, I would expect that he would interact with the mother of those children to explain to her that they were in danger, or he might do any number of things.
Did he tell you that? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Short of killing a person.
Did the defendant describe doing any of those things that you might expect? Talking to the mother of the children, intervening in some other way. Did he describe doing any of those things to you?
No, again, he said very specifically that his mind immediately went to kill Mr. Sneiderman, and that's what he set out to do.
Are you sure? Are you sure he didn't tell you that he told Andrea Sneiderman at some point?
No, he didn't. He told me that he did not tell Andrea Sneiderman that he was the father of the children or that the children were in danger.
Assume for the purposes of my question that somebody else testified to this jury that the defendant did in fact tell them that he told Andrea Sneiderman that the kids were in danger, and that he concluded that as a result she was not equipped to deal with the situation. Is that consistent with what he told you or inconsistent with what he told you?
He did not tell me that.
He didn't tell you that, okay. When you were talking with the defendant about his relationship with Andrea Sneiderman, was there anything that in what he told you that made you think that the defendant was experiencing any sort of erotomania?
Erotomania?
Yes.
No. Erotomania is a delusion where a person believes without evidence that someone is in love with them. And so, no, they seem to have had a mutual affair.
And are you basing that on what the defendant told you as well as your review of the evidence, other evidence in the case?
Yes.
Witness statements, email exchanges, things
Yes,
like that?
emails, his own statements.
Okay. Well, can't erotomania be that someone's having a relationship with somebody and you just, you think it's more than it is? Can erotomania be that?
I'm trying to think of an example of that, and I feel like as long as a relationship is mutual, it's not erotomania.
It's not erotomania?
No, when you have a mutual relationship, there's mutual attraction, and so there's no delusional component to that.
But what if one person in the mutual relationship is in it kind of for the short term, but the other person in the relationship is much more committed and they want it to last forever? Isn't that erotomania?
No.
What's
no. That stinks.
I'm sorry.
I said that stinks.
Okay. Now, I heard it.
That's
too bad.
That's too bad. That's just an unhappy situation for the person who wants more.
That's too bad. I'm sorry.
Could also be motive for murder, right?
Yes.
All right. Dr. Browning, have you ever heard the phrase tapping on a delusion or knocking on a delusion?
No, you'll have to give me some context for that.
All right. Is there a super secret way to ask a question of somebody experiencing a delusion so that you get the response relative to the delusion, but anybody who's maybe not trained or doesn't ask the right question wouldn't do it?
I don't think that there's a super secret way. I think that as a psychiatrist, we learn to be direct and ask what we need to know. And so I don't know that there's any super secret way to ask about delusions other than to just ask lots of screening questions.
All right. When you talked to the defendant, did you ask him questions about why he killed Rusty?
Yes.
All right. And how did you ask those questions? In a very direct way or kind of psychiatrist special kind of way?
Direct.
Okay. Like what? What kind of question? You may not be able to recall specifically. But
Again, why did you kill Rusty Sneiderman? Tell us about that.
In your review of the police interview with the defendant in January 2011, when the police officers asked him about his relationship with Andrea Sneiderman, was their question, in your opinion, direct enough that if the defendant was having a delusion about his relationship with Andrea, he would have been forthcoming with it?
Yeah. They asked him directly, and if he wanted to answer honestly, he could have.
What about when they asked him about Rusty Sneiderman? And the defendant's response was, if you recall that the defendant's response was, Rusty was a great guy, he was a super smart guy, he was a great guy. Is there anything about the way they asked the question that would have prevented him or wouldn't have elicited the response from him consistent with his delusion that Rusty was in fact hurting his children and he had to kill them he had to kill Rusty to protect them?
No, I think asking about Rusty was the way
that
to
would have
get
done
at
it?
Yeah.
When he denied being there at the scene of the crime, anything about the way they asked those questions that makes you think, well, maybe if they'd asked a different way, he would have come forward with the truth?
No, I think it was 6 hours of asking a lot of the same questions over and over.
Okay. Now, the defendant acknowledged to you, didn't he, that he wasn't experiencing any hallucinations or delusions the day of murder?
Yes.
Did the defendant talk to you at all or describe in any way hearing voices or seeing things or being compelled to do anything the day that he shot Rusty Sneiderman?
No.
No angels?
Not on the day, no.
No demons?
No.
No voices?
No voices. And as far as delusions go, he said that he consistently had the delusion that the children were his and that he needed to protect them. There was nothing more significant that day. There was nothing special. There was no new delusion. There was no new talk of the delusion. But that is, he alleges, the delusion that he was operating under at that time.
And did you find any evidence in any of your review of the material that supports that?
No.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Browning.
You may proceed, counsel, with cross-examination if you wish.
Thank you, Judge.
You're welcome.
Good morning, Dr. Browning.
Good morning.
I want to go over some of the things you just testified to.
Okay.
You said that you are the Associate Clinical Director of the Forensic Unit, correct?
Yes.
And Dr. Huey is the Clinical Director, right?
Yes, Dr. Huey runs the forensic program from an administrative perspective. I work with the medical staff to supervise the medical aspect of the forensic department.
You talked about people with mental illness being able to generally know right from wrong, right?
Yes.
Can people who are highly intelligent also be mentally ill?
Absolutely.
Can people who are highly educated also be mentally ill?
Yes.
Ms. Cross asked you about some questions about somebody being hyper-religious. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And you gave an example of a patient of yours that you're treating, right?
Yes.
About this person writing.
Yes.
And you said that just reading the Torah daily does not qualify as hyper-religious, right?
No.
What if the person feels as though they have completely digested it and understand it 100%? Does that get closer to being hyper-religious?
I don't know. It's so hard to tell from a cultural context. There are lots of people who read and digest and understand and love the Bible and the Torah. It gets to a hyper-religious context when they start inserting themselves into it.
Okay.
When you use the term inserting themselves into, what do you mean? Inserting themselves?
What I mean is that they start to believe that the book was written for them, or they have a special connection to God, or that they are going to bring spirituality to everyone else in a different, special kind of way.
So if a person suddenly believes they're an expert on the Torah, for example, and they've had no training or no prior experiences with it.
Yes.
You talked about having been assigned this case on June 15th, 2016, yes. Correct? And that was according to a court order, correct?
Yes.
And you finished your report, I think, on
July 11th.
July 11th, and that was per the court order, correct?
Yes.
And you said you spent approximately 200 hours in reviewing and talking to Hemy Neuman and writing the report, correct?
Yes.
And you did that while also you're a salaried employee, right?
Yes.
So you had your other duties at the hospital, right?
Yes.
21 patients?
It was a lot of work.
Was somebody else helping you out with your normal duties at the hospital?
No. No.
You talked on and off about malingering, and I'm going to ask you some questions now, and we'll talk about some more in a bit. But if you're evaluating somebody for malingering, is it a clue to you if the person says, I didn't do it? Does that suggest that the person might be malingering if they deny having done it?
Potentially. I would say that as a forensic psychiatrist, I evaluate everyone for malingering. Mm-hmm. And so it's potentially a clue if they say they didn't do it, but plenty of people didn't do it, so that in and of itself doesn't mean anything.
If you're evaluating for to determine if the person knew right from wrong, does it mean more to you if they say they didn't do it than if you're just evaluating for competency?
Help me understand what you mean. If a person says they didn't do it, I'm not evaluating whether the person did it or not.
Right.
I'm evaluating competency.
Right.
When I'm evaluating criminal responsibility, if the person says that they didn't do it, then it's hard for me to give an opinion about criminal responsibility, or that they might be not guilty by reason of insanity because they're saying that they didn't do the crime.
Well, if they said they didn't do it, then and you've reviewed evidence, police reports, indictment, witness statements, that kind of thing, that would indicate that the person did do it, but they're telling you, I did not do this.
Then automatically they can't be not guilty by reason of insanity.
Right. And that's because it indicates to you that they do know right from wrong.
Well, no, because you can't say that. So what not guilty by reason of insanity means, what I teach my patients, is that it means that you did it, but that when you did it, you didn't know right from wrong. So if the person is saying that they didn't do it, just automatically they can't plead not guilty by reason of insanity, because that plea requires them admitting that they did do it.
Right, but when you're doing your evaluation, separate and aside from what plea they might actually enter in court, when you're doing your evaluation and they tell you, I didn't do this, and you're evaluating whether they know right from wrong. And again, you have all this information to indicate that they did in fact do it.
Yeah,
that tells you that they know right from wrong.
Well, that's one piece of evidence that might go toward that. But then, I'm thinking of a paranoid person who might not be competent to stand trial yet and might not be ready to go to court, who might deny that they did any crime just because they're not ready to talk about it yet. And that person might be eligible for not guilty by reason of insanity.
Okay, but that would be a person not competent, you said?
Yes, that would be a person not competent to stand trial.
You talked about your conversations with Hemy, and you talked about him mentioning a first attempt on Rusty Sneiderman's life.
Yes.
And that was where he went to the home and was discovered laying out by in the yard, right?
Right.
And were you able to verify that in the police reports that actually occurred?
Well, need a break? You okay, Madam Juror? Need water? You good? All right. You may continue. She appears to be okay. I said appears. Go ahead.
You said that you reviewed police reports with this case, correct?
I did review police reports. The major evidence that came for that was that Mr. Neumann described it and told me about it.
Okay, so you don't recall seeing that in the police reports?
I don't recall seeing that specifically in the police report.
And did you ask him when he told you about that, how he felt about failing?
I don't think I did.
When you talked about his description of the angel and the demon, let me back up. You said you reviewed the interview he gave with Dr. Crawford.
Yes.
Correct. Did you actually watch the interview, or did you just read the transcript of the interview?
No, I didn't have a transcript. I watched it several times.
And so his description of the angel included that he was able to describe some facial features, a flowy, I think, pink gown, right?
Yes.
And you talked about one of the things that leads you to your opinion being that the inconsistencies in his description about when the angel first came to him in July.
Yes.
And how he told Dr. Crawford that she was oversized, and how he told you and Dr. Huey that she was normal sized.
Yes.
And you said that your reason for that being an issue for you is because that was a seminal event in his life.
Right.
Right? There are times when a seminal event in somebody's life that's also traumatic can be blocked out, right?
Yes. Just to be clear, he didn't describe experiencing the angel as in any way traumatic.
I understand. But again, if somebody does experience some trauma, they can block out that event even if it's seminal in their lives, or what you would consider to be seminal.
Oh, absolutely, sure.
The angel, you said when the first time the angel visited him, he told you that that the angel said the kids are yours, the Sneiderman children are yours, right?
Yes.
And at some point, the angel also said you have to protect them, right?
Yes.
That's what he told you. You discussed the shooting of Rusty and his police interview over 6 or so hours. And you watched that interview, you said?
Yes.
And when you discussed with him, why he did it or why he didn't tell the police, did you ask him if he would have done it with the police standing right there?
He volunteered, actually, that he would have done it with the police standing right there. I didn't have to ask him.
And he also told you that the reason for the disguise, one of the reasons for the disguise, the main reason for the disguise, and the attempts to hide this was because he didn't want Andrea to find out it was him, right?
Right.
You talked about not seeing any signs of mania while he was being interviewed by the police, right?
Correct.
And that interview was conducted in January of 2011, right?
Yes.
And this event happened on November 11th, 2010, right?
Yes.
And so if he was not experiencing a manic episode while he was talking to the police, you wouldn't expect to see him exhibiting signs of mania then, correct?
Yes, but when we asked him if he believed at the time of the police interview that the children were his, he said yes. Okay. So he was delusional at that time, according to him. With bipolar mania, if he were delusional at that time, he would have also had to have had other manic symptoms.
Gotcha. When you talk about reviewing all of this information that was sent to you by the state, the previous evaluations, the medical records, the interviews, did you just review them, or you in detail went through them?
Oh, I in detail went through them.
Okay, including the emails?
Yes.
And just to be clear, your evaluation of Hemy Neuman was not for competence in this case, correct?
No, it was not for competency to stand trial. It was for criminal responsibility.
And it was not to determine what his sanity is right now, today, correct?
Correct.
Or the day you evaluated him, correct?
For any evaluation of criminal responsibility, what we're looking for is the defendant's mental functioning at the time of the crime.
Okay. But you would agree that his mental status now, or at the time you evaluated him, plays a part in your opinion, correct?
Yes.
And between November 18th of 2010 and now, he's received therapy, right? You know that from your review of the documents.
Yes.
And you know that he's been receiving medication since 2013, right?
Yes.
Medication specifically for mental health disorders, correct?
Yes.
And when somebody's receiving therapy, part of the goal, at least part of the goal, is to, in any given case, is to help the person get better, right?
Sure.
With the information that you reviewed, and you mentioned a number of witnesses who gave statements and that you listened to or reviewed those statements, did you independently interview any of those sources?
I did not.
Did you interview Hemy Neuman's sister, Monique Mitch?
I did not.
Did you interview his mother?
No.
Did you interview his brother?
No.
Any other family members of his that you interviewed?
I did not interview anyone except for Hemy Neuman.
Okay. When you do an evaluation in a criminal case, for instance, you said you asked to review certain materials, right?
Yes.
And oftentimes they just send them to you, and then you might request additional materials, right?
Yes.
And is it your normal practice to try and review that information before or after you see the person?
I try to do everything I can before I see the person.
And you did that in this case?
Yes.
And the reason, I think you may have touched on this on your direct, is because you need some background information, right?
Yes.
You need to be able to tell if there are consistencies or inconsistencies in what the person then tells you, right?
Right.
Do you have situations where you have patients at the hospital or folks that you've evaluated who don't have some of the collateral sources, and I'm not talking about the police reports and that kind of stuff that you'd get from the court system, but family members to talk to or records that you might be able to obtain?
Yes, that's actually most of the time.
Okay. And so you base your diagnosis in those situations on what information you get from the court, right? Or the attorneys,
Yes.
right? And the self-report of the patient.
And observation, because
Right. And-
I have patients in the hospital with me.
Right. And so together, those three components, you can still make a diagnosis, right?
Yes. In any psychiatric interview, it's very important to gather collateral information. With the patient population we have at Georgia Regional, sometimes it's very hard. Mentally ill people move, they lose track of phone numbers, and so sometimes really all you got is the patient, some jail records, a police report, and however long they've been in the hospital to observe their behavior.
Is it fair to say that it would be easier to determine somebody's insanity closer to the time of the event?
It depends on the situation. In this case, we had a lot of information from close to the time of the event. We had all these interviews with people who were interviewed shortly after the murder and who could, I think, reliably recall what was going on the day. So if I were just coming to see Mr. Neuman 6 years later and I didn't have any information, then, oh, yes, my opinion would be very much suspect. But with all of the collateral information we had that dates back to the time of the crime, that really helped us.
Okay. And you're an MD, you're a medical doctor, right?
Yes.
And you can prescribe medication, right?
And do.
That's part of your job, right?
Yes.
Prescriptions generally have to be renewed from time to time, right?
Yes.
They're not, I mean, you can't just write a prescription for a lifetime supply of X.
No.
And as a doctor, you have to be licensed. I know you talked about being board certified, but you also have to be licensed where you're practicing, correct?
Yes.
And there's a board that requires you to adhere to certain rules and regulations, right?
Sure.
Before you prescribe medication to a patient or somebody that you are working with, you have to, or you should assess, evaluate, examine the person, right?
That is correct. I should do that.
Okay. And you do that, right?
Absolutely.
And that's what all doctors are supposed to do, right?
Yes.
So it's not okay to just prescribe medication because somebody walks into your office and says, hey, I want a prescription for this.
No, you have to evaluate the person. You have to have a visit with the person.
You're familiar with a medication called Remeron, right?
Yes.
And that's an antidepressant, right?
Yes.
Prescribed for people who are depressed.
Yes.
Right?
One of the good things about Remeron is that it also helps people sleep.
Is it prescribed as a sleeping aid?
It can be prescribed as, what I like to prescribe it for is for people with depression who aren't sleeping well. It's a great medication for that because you get that side effect of helping the person go to sleep, and you also get the intended effect of treating their depression.
But the sleeping effect is a side effect.
It is a side effect.
So there are medications like Remeron that are sometimes prescribed for what they might call off-label usage.
Yes, sure.
You're familiar with Depakote, right?
Yes.
And that's a mood stabilizer, right?
Yes, it is.
Commonly prescribed to people who have bipolar disorder, right?
Yes.
And those are the two medications that Hemy Neuman has been taking, correct?
Yes. Since 2013.
Have you prescribed those medications before to patients?
Sure, absolutely.
And have you treated patients who are taking them, though you might not have been the original prescriber?
Yes.
When you prescribe medications for a patient, do you follow up with them to check on them and see how they're doing?
Yes. Well, it depends on the setting that I'm in now. One of my other jobs at the hospital is working in the admissions area at night. So when I work in the admissions area, sometimes I'm meeting a person, interacting with them, prescribing them a medication, and then sending them back out to the community. So in that case, I won't follow up with the person. But if it's an inpatient that I'm working with or someone that I claim as my patient, then yes, I will follow up.
When you're in your capacity and working in admissions, part of your instruction would be to follow up with their regular provider. That's
Yes.
correct. And part of the follow-up is to make sure that there are no adverse effects from the medication, right?
Yeah, make sure there's no adverse effects, make sure it's working, make sure it's reasonable.
If the person that you prescribe medication to, and again, this would not be a situation where you're working in admissions, but one of your patients, you prescribe a medication to somebody and they start experiencing some of the side effects that sometimes happen with medications, you would consider changing the medication, right?
What I would first, yes, absolutely, I would consider changing the medication. What I would want to do is interact with my patient to see what their problem is. Maybe we can adjust the dosage, maybe we need to change, maybe we need to do something different.
Okay. You don't just ignore it, though.
No, they're the person that has to take the medication, so I want to know what's going through their head.
If you prescribe a medication and it's not having the intended effect, you check to see if maybe the dosage is correct or off, right?
Yeah,
Or check to see if maybe there's a better medication that might help this person more, correct?
right,
So again, you might consider changes.
yes.
If a patient comes to the hospital and has been prescribed a medication, not by you, but by another doctor, and you don't think that medication is appropriate for that patient, would you consider changing the medication or taking the patient off of it?
Yeah, that's a tough situation, and that's one of those situations that I encounter a lot, again, when I work in admissions, or even when I work with my inpatients at Georgia Regional. Sometimes people are on medication that I don't think is a great idea for them. In those cases, I talk to the patient to see just how attached they are to the medication. If I don't think it's harming them, sometimes I will continue it and let them know that maybe they don't need it. Sometimes I'll change it. It just depends on what the individual circumstance is.
A lot of times with patients who are on mental health medications, they don't like how it makes them feel, correct?
Correct.
And so you have a lot of times where you have patients who are non-compliant with medication, correct?
Yes.
And
Ladies and
Remeron,
gentlemen, it is that time with the Assistant Deputy Garrett. We're going to pick up and that it is your break. Some of you are looking at the clock, so we'll let you know you're ready for your break. Deputy Garrett, come back in about 10 minutes.
All right.